of USA Today, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Tom Laidlaw, the former NHL defenseman with the New York Rangers and Los Angeles Kings. And our guest is Brian Hedger, the Columbus Post-Dispatch, who's going to fill us in on all things Columbus Blue Jackets related. And Brian, let's start with, the Blue Jackets are, I think, 3-3-2 starting out the season. Is this kind of where you thought they would be as they sort of made the transition from the team they were last season to the team they are this season?
In some ways, it is. I didn't expect them to just charge out of the gate and be undefeated and shock the world that way. But if you look at it, they've lost their last two games, but they were both in overtime. They were able to get those games in Chicago to overtime. And that it wasn't just getting the games to overtime. I guess that's the more frustrating part is the Blue Jackets, they controlled the game against the Blackhawks on Friday night. And then they played even better Saturday night at home against the Islanders and didn't win either game. So I think that's the more frustrating part. But I think in the big picture, when you look at it, they got points out of both those games, right? So they have 8 points right now, and they're playing 3 and 4. So if they were to win tonight in Toronto, you take 4 out of 6 points. I think you take that any day of the week if you're the Blue Jackets, when you go into a weekend like this. So they're having trouble scoring points or goals. Sorry. They're having trouble putting the puck in the net a little bit, but they're not having trouble creating scoring chances. So do they stay patient? And I guess they're going to have to and just see if the goals start coming. If guys just start, burying opportunities more, or do they, react and try and go out and get a score if they can, early in the season via trade. They have 8 defensemen they could potentially use as trade bait. So it's an interesting start to the season.
So I was here in New York when John Tortorella came in here, and I really saw a big difference. I viewed him as a guy, like one of the best coaches out there, is really getting the most out of the team, really pushing them to get the best. Obviously now after losing all those free agents, and so you can say, well, now the team is understaffed, however you want to say it. Is that the same John Tortorella?
Oh, you know what? He has come into this season and he has been fired up from day one. And he even told us once that he spent most of his summer basically thinking about this season and about how to get this team back to the playoffs. It is a personal thing. I don't think he holds it against the guys who left necessarily. He's not going to come out and publicly slam any of them. And there's no reason to, because the guys who all left, they all gave their best for the Blue Jackets. You can't complain about anything that Sergei Bobrovsky did, or Artemi Panarin, or Matt Duchene. As far as on the ice stuff, they had to deal with a lot of stuff behind the scenes, because people knew that guys were leaving and things like that. John Tortorella has talked several times about how that was the weirdest season of his life, trying to keep that whole thing together. But what that did when those guys left is that it created, an even bigger chip on his shoulder, I think. And he's really, yeah, exactly. And he has really taken up the defense for the case of the Columbus Blue Jackets and Columbus as a hockey market. He's really taken this personally. And so I think a guy like him is perfect for a team like this. I think it's perfect for a team like the Blue Jackets, who always seem to be kind of young with Jarmo Kekalainen. They have an average age of 25.7 years old. It's one of the youngest, if not the youngest, in the league this year. I think a guy like Tortorella comes in with a bunch of young, eager guys who want to learn how to play the game. I think he's a perfect combination for that.
Brian, 2-part question. Number one, should we believe in Korpisalo as a guy that can carry the load as the number one goalie? And number two, were you a little surprised that Elvis hasn't been stronger, given the buildup coming into this season?
I'll take Korpisalo first. I do believe that we can believe in Korpisalo. He did get off to a little bit of I don't want to say shaky start, but it was he looked nervous. He didn't look like necessarily, a number one type of guy. But around that, I think the Buffalo game helped them. That was game 3, and they won that in overtime. He made a couple big saves in overtime. And then the next 3 games, the next 3 starts, he was outstanding, just outstanding. And if you look back, when he was a rookie who came up, Sergei Bobrovsky got injured. I think this was in 2015. It was either 2015 or 2016. But anyway, Bobrovsky got injured. He was out for about a month, and they basically had no other choice to go with Korpisalo, and they did. And he started about 20 games in a row. He had a .920 save percentage. I think he had a GAA. It was definitely less than 3. So he played really well during that stretch. And I think they looked back on that and said, look, when this guy plays a lot, then he's good. He's pretty good. But when he like some guys just struggle with that backup role. It's not an easy role to have. So then that's probably a good segue to go to Elvis, and because he is clearly the backup at this point. And he's never been a backup before. So I think that there's a little bit of that in there. But the biggest thing with Elvis is I think he's put a lot of pressure on himself to come over here. In fact, I know he's put a lot of pressure on himself to come over here and kind of be the guy. And, that doesn't always help you sometimes when you're a rookie in the NHL, especially with a goalie. And he's used to those bigger ice rinks out there in Europe, in Switzerland, where it's almost like soccer on ice, right? Guys are like bringing the puck into the zone and they're trying to set up plays and they're making 100 passes and they get yelled at if they take a shot from a sharp angle. Like, what are you doing? We could have had a better shot. He's used to all that stuff. And so when he comes over here and it's a smaller rink and it's bigger guys and they're faster and the game is going a million miles an hour and shots are coming from everywhere, I think his head's spinning a little bit. But he looked really good in Chicago on Friday night. Like, he played really well. I expect him to bounce back. And I think that they're going to have 2 pretty solid options here by the end of the season. But there might be some bumps in the road.
Do you think he could still steal the net?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think it's anything is decided long term at this point. I think there's definitely a sense in the room, and just listening to John Tortorella talk, there's definitely more comfort right now with Joonas Korpisalo because he's been around for 4 years. They know Joonas, they know Korpi, and they trust him, and so there is more there. But I mean, hey, I don't think anything's decided long term yet.
I kind of get the sense from you, and you touched on it before. It almost sounds like particularly Bobrovsky, when they made all the trades last year and everything, they kind of knew am I right in saying they kind of knew they were going to lose him or had a good chance of losing him?
Yes. Oh, yeah, they knew. And he came into training camp last year on the first day of camp and all but told us, that I'm out of here. Like, I have 1 year left. I mean, he basically said, I've told, management what my decision is, and then we said, well, what is it? And then he wouldn't tell us. But he said, they know. And so, through the year, as we talked to people from management, and everybody knew that Bob was out, and that Panarin probably was too as well. So that made that whole situation last year very interesting, and it's just on a daily basis. They had fires to put out, and they put them out with very candid meetings that they had, a lot of them, including the biggest one was in Vancouver at the end of the year, and that one really helped spring them to the playoffs.
So they made all those moves, and knowing they're going to potentially lose Bobrovsky and Panarin in particular, they still made the moves, thinking, let's go for it right now and try to win it, to convince them to stay or to try to win it. It
was a go for it. There's no question about it. They went for it. General manager Jarmo Kekalainen he has no regrets. I mean, we've asked him several times, hey, would you do it maybe differently? No, because he knew those guys were leaving, and he has a lot of trust and a lot of faith in the young guys that they've brought in this year. They have like 5 rookies right now, I believe, and he thinks that they're NHL players. And we've already seen Alexander Tessier. He seems to be like maybe the cream of the crop right now. He's kind of on that verge of. I mean, he's really close to putting it together and being a thing in the NHL. Like, he's pretty good. And then Emil Bemstrom is also starting to kind of put it together. If you just watch him play game to game, he's starting to look like the game is starting to slow down for him a little bit. So they have some talent there, and the Jackets are putting their faith in it.
Brian, we're going to let you go, but before we do, I have to ask you. Before the season, I looked at this team, and I thought, this team still has a chance to make the playoffs. Even after all the defections, I like the youth of this team. as you mentioned, Tortorella is a good fit for this team. Like, I think he appreciates this team more than any other team he's ever had. I'm not sure why, but he likes it. He likes this team. And, I think he believes in this team, especially the younger players. And I know Seth Jones believes in him. And I like the defense. And Seth Jones, I think, is the future Norris Trophy winner. So I think there's still a lot to like about the Blue Jackets. But you're there every day. Do you feel this team in the Metropolitan Division can still make the playoffs this season?
I think they can. Absolutely. I'm not going to say, for sure they're a playoff team. That'd be silly. But I'm also not ready to say that they're not a playoff team. I mean, listen, if you just look at the way the games have been played in their first 8, there's really only one game in the bunch that I can think of where they were just blown out of the water, and that was in Pittsburgh. Things just kind of went tragically wrong for Elvis in the second half of the game. But pretty much every other game, they've either been very competitive as far as the way puck possession and generating scoring chances, or they've dominated. They just haven't scored enough goals off that domination. So I think that's a good sign, a good early sign. I think that they definitely can make the playoffs if they keep playing this way.
Well, thanks a lot, Brian, for joining us, and thanks for your insight. And hopefully we can have you on again up the road when we get a little bit farther down and an understanding what the Metropolitan Division is going to look like. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian.
Right, thanks, guys.
Thank you for guaranteeing they make the playoffs. That's the way we'll remember that, okay?
just save the recording and just play it back again.
All right, good. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, guys.
Way to go, Tommy, putting them on the spot. I love that.
Well, I guarantee that the Rangers are going to make the playoffs, so we'll put somebody else on the hot seat too.
Yeah, Brian's real wired into the Blue Jackets, and he covered the Blackhawks and the Red Wings actually before he moved to Columbus. He's pretty knowledgeable on the league, but I think I like what he had to say about them. You can tell he's got a great understanding of how this works in terms of whether or not the Blue Jackets can take this kind of young team and sort of move forward in a division where I think youth isn't served. Like, that's a tough division to try to win with younger players, but I think he understands that. You can tell that's why he said he's not willing to say they're in, but he's also not willing to say they're out. Yeah,
like I was surprised how enthusiastic he was about the team, and mentioning that Jarmo Karkalainen, the general manager, when he made those trades last year, pretty much knew he wasn't going to keep those guys, but felt confident they had enough young players to come in and fill the role. So that was an interesting take on it.
And I liked what he did last year.
Yeah,
I really did. Like, he knew what the score was. They knew they weren't going to sign Bobrovsky, and he went for it. He said, "Well, what the heck?
Yeah.
We might as well try it." And they could have traded him away, but what message would that be for the fans of Columbus if you're not willing to take what was considered a decent team? I mean, not a great team, but a decent team, and make a run for it. Like I want to see that out of all my general managers in the league. I don't want to see tanking. I want to see,
especially when they'd never won a round in the playoffs, had they? That was
right.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. You look at going back at the history of this team. The fan base, when that team arrived in Columbus, was thrilled to have them. Absolutely thrilled. I remember the excitement in the city, having a major league franchise. Well, they already had one, the Ohio State Buckeyes, but I mean, one that we recognize as a major league franchise. And to have that there, they were excited. They filled up the arena. It was hard to get tickets. I remember my family wanted to go down there. I live in Michigan, and we wanted to make the 3-hour. It was hard to find tickets to get up my family into the games.
Right.
And then slowly that eroded because they had no success, through the Doug McClain era. And, they got in the playoffs, but they couldn't win a round of the playoffs. So, I appreciate that. And I don't think they're out of it. I think that they have a shot. I like these good young players. I'm a big Seth Jones believer.
Oh, I like him a lot. He's good. Man, get a big guy like that can skate. Wow, he's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And all right, Tom, let's play a little bit of game here. Let's just, I'm going to feed you some questions here, and you tell me what you think of about it all. Number one here, and I think this is an important question considering he's leading the NHL in points, is John Carlson. Where does he fit now in your mind among the top defensemen in the league right now?
It's funny. It's like I don't know what it is. He's one of those guys that I don't like. It's not that I don't think he's a talented athlete. I look at him as a defenseman. I'm thinking, can you win? Obviously, he's won, but is he that pivotal piece of the puzzle. But I watched him play, and I was like, "Oh man, this guy's really controlling the game. Like he's on power plays. He looks so confident out there. He's just like he's dominating. Like you talk about Ovechkin on their power play, how important he is. But I think now Carlson has got up to that same level where he's equally as important. So again, for a guy, I try not to like him. He's playing great now. Again, I haven't been crazy about his defensive part of his game, but he's so good offensively. The puck gets out of the zone, even if he isn't a great defensive player, which maybe I'm not giving enough credit for. The puck is never in the zone with him because he gets it out so quickly. So he's the real deal. It's not like this is and I don't think he's going to stay at the top of the scoring list for the year, but he is the real deal. He's one of the top defensemen in the National Hockey League right now.
I don't mind arguing with you, Tom, but I really don't want to argue with you about the ability to play defense. But I thought he was actually okay as a defensive player.
I've seen him around sometimes, and like he's. I just think the game's changed so much, right? Like it's get the puck out of your zone. That's a good defensive defenseman now. Where I guess the old days is clearing out the front of the net, being able to read plays defensively. I still think that's relaxed a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think this year this might be his time as we put him. I mean, it's way too early, but that's not going to stop us from talking about the Norris Trophy a little bit. I mean, if you win, if you're going to stay among the scoring leaders, in the National Hockey League as a defenseman, you're going to be in consideration.
Yeah, I mean that's what I guess for me. That's what I don't necessarily like with the Norris Trophy. It's turned into like more who gets the most points now. Like I still think a guy like I watch me. I'm a huge Victor Hedman fan, not just because he puts up points, but he plays well at the other end as well. He's like a poor man's Nicholas Lidstrom, maybe not too poor man's Nicholas Lidstrom, but so.
Yeah, I mean it should be both, and I do think they take that into consideration. We've certainly seen that with Erik Karlsson. I mean, every time Karlsson was up for it, there was always a lot of discussion whether he did well enough defensively to earn the right. But there's always been a lot of talk for years about that should be two separate awards. There should be a trophy, and there should be like the Rod Langway Trophy, given to the best defensive defenseman. Which the problem with that is the subjectivity of that is beyond description. Right. For a bunch of people to sit around and watch, top players play defense and decide which one's doing it better is a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, as well as the game, don't you think that would be difficult?
Well, I don't think it'd be that difficult. I mean, I think the people that who do you select to make that decision? Do you get a bunch of former defensive defensemen to sit around? Like when I watch Victor Hedman, when I watch Jay Bouwmeester, when I watch Pietrangelo, I guess those guys are coming top of their mind now because they won last year. But I think those are good defensive defensemen. The way, like I watch a Jay Bouwmeester play, or I watch Stahl here in New York, and they don't get a lot of credit, but they do all those little things right. Playing the angles. I mentioned Nick Lidstrom. He was a master at it. I mean, he could do everything in my mind. He was great offensively, but he was so good defensively because he's sticking the passing lane, using the angles, always able to read the play. He was never surprised, backing up his teammate all the time when he was carrying the puck out of his zone. I do think you could. To me, when I watch the game, I can decide who I think is a real good defensive defenseman. And obviously, I'm such a big believer in Victor Hedman. But like I said, the Jay Bouwmeesters of the world. I mean, Brooks Orpik when they won Stanley Cups. Those kind of guys. I mean, to me, they're pretty easy to pick out during the game.
But you're making my case, Tommy. I mean, you just rattled off like 5 or 6 guys, and you said it's real easy to determine the good defensive players. But can you look at Pietrangelo and another good defensive player like Hedman and decide by watching them 4 times which one's better at preventing the opposition from scoring easily? Now, I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying, I think that's subjective.
Well, it's certainly subjective, but I think it's pretty easy every year to come up with your top 3 guys defensively. And then after that, okay, maybe it's a little bit tougher to decide who he is. I found even for myself when I'm playing, and I had like a year where now my confidence level is sky high. And we talk about confidence, like it comes and goes with players sometimes. But if you can carry that confidence defensively, like you just watch a guy, he feels so confident about how he can read plays, break up 2-on-1s and 3-on-2s and blocking shots and getting your stick in the passing lane. I do think you'll have some years where like maybe Jay Bouwmeester isn't as good defensive, but other years, wow, you can just tell his game's all put together, just like an offensive player, I think.
Well, to be honest with you, I was playing devil's advocate because I completely agree with you. I think we could do that. I think we decide.
Are you trying to pick a fight? Is that what you're trying to do?
Pardon me?
Trying to pick a fight? Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. I'm not going to pick a fight with a guy who says he's in better shape now than when he played in the NHL. But I think you can do that if if you get enough views of a guy, because I agree with you. I mean, you can tell when a guy's on top of his game. I mean, the seasons that Drew Doughty's been at his best, he's been a beast defensively. You can just tell by watching him. But it really is unfair to compare a defensive-minded defenseman whose only concern, or his main concern is preventing opposition scoring, to a guy like Erik Karlsson, who carries the puck up ice like he's Bobby Orr half the time. So anyway,
I lived it in my career too. I mean, I some of my best years I could walk out of Madison Square Garden and people didn't know where I was, so I was fine with that. But it is a different ballgame altogether.
Well, I bet Herb Brooks would argue is on the nights that you were not noticeable, you were at your best.
Yeah, totally. Yep. Kenny Moore was one of the best with that fantastic career. Yep.
Okay. Let's move on here. Where does Leon Draisaitl fit among the top players in the game?
Well, they made a swing through New York here, and I got to watch him play a couple of games. And to be honest with you, I didn't really realize how good of a player he was, but I watched him now. I mean, people made the comparison because it's the Oilers, but the Messier Gretzky comparison, I don't know if either one of those players are at that yet with Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. But I mean, wow, those two are a dynamic pair. They really changed the game. The other team playing against them really has to change the way they play and who they match up against. So, you can play them together and they're dominant, the Crosby Malkin kind of guys, or you can split them up. I think they're the real deal. He's a one heck of a player. And I did not realize how good he was until he came through here and I really paid attention to him.
Yeah, I think he's already in the top 5 players in the game. Draisaitl, he's a 50-goal scorer, and the thing about him that's so remarkable is the amount of time he can play. Like, this guy can play 25 minutes a night. Like, he's a forward. That seems ridiculous that he can do that.
But it's kind of sneaky good, though. Like when you watch McDavid, you come out of your seat. Wow, this guy's great. I think with Draisaitl, what kind of works against him, maybe is not people knowing him as much, is that he isn't that guy that pulls you out of your seat as much. As a Connor McDavid, he just does I think, wow, he's just like a smart hockey player. Real good.
Yeah, it's not unthinkable that at the end of this season that Connor McDavid and Draisaitl could be acknowledged as the 2 top players of the season. He's that good. I mean, and they're on both on the same team. That's kind of like
the guy in Pittsburgh, Mr. Crosby, might have something to say with that. With all the injuries players they've lost, but.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. I mean, I still think Crosby's the best player in the game. I'm just saying for this season. Okay, number 3. Do you believe in the Colorado Avalanche?
Oh, 100%. Huge belief. I think they're the real deal. I love the way they play. They play with an attitude. I think they have everything, all the offensive power. It seems like they've got good enough goaltending now. I think they're the top team in the West. And in fact, I'm picking them to go against Boston in the Stanley Cup Finals. I think they're that good.
Yeah, I took them to win the division. I like them a lot, and they're very entertaining. And, there's some subtle things on that team. Like I think, Cal McCarr's bringing him in. He's a real good fit as a rookie for that team. But, Gerard, I think is already underrated. I really like him as a guy that can really skate, do a lot of things for that team on defense. So I believe in that team as well. Number 4, do you think the Coyotes have finally turned the corner?
Wow. They're one of those teams that until they finally do it, they've always seemed like find a way to not do it down the road. You think, okay, now this is going to be the year. They're a good hockey team. But I mean, they're playing that way. I mean, I love Rick. I love the Rick Tocchet part of it. We talked before about having, those kind of players now become coaches, the Rod Brindamers, the Jared Gallants, those kind of guys. He seems to be that same kind of guy. He had coached before, didn't work out for him, had to step back. So I do think they're the real deal. It's injuries. It's can they maintain stuff? But I like that hockey team right now. I wouldn't guarantee it. I think they should make the playoffs, but I wouldn't. I don't put them. I watch them play, and I just don't get the feeling like, wow, they're a lock. I do think they're good, but it'll be a struggle for them to make the playoffs still.
Yeah, I agree with you too that Tocchet is very important to that team. I think, like we've talked about, Tortorella was a good fit. I think Tockett's a good fit for that team. I think the fact that he's been a player and done it all. I think the players relate to that. They know that he knows what they need to do to be competitive, because he was always competitive.
Yes, he was.
A player. So I think that's key for them. I think John Chayka does a tremendous job too. Like, he's really an aggressive trader. If you look at his history, he's the youngest general manager ever in the history of sports. And you look at his history, and he's already been just an incredibly aggressive trader. He's made a bunch of trades, and I like the Phil Kessel trade.
Totally.
It was a great message to his team. I believe in you. I think we're going to make the playoffs. I think Kessel needed out of Pittsburgh desperately. I think he'll do all that he can to remodel his career yet again for like the third time, as he tries to sort of remind everyone, hey, I can still score goals. So,
well, and you know what I like about somebody picks up Kessel. People can talk about some of the deficiencies he may have. Maybe people claim he doesn't work as hard in practice as you'd like, or he's not as good defensively. But I want to look at the player, and I'm going to say, okay, there was the bad stuff, but what's the good stuff he does for me? Is he that 50-goal scorer? He's been a dominant player in the playoffs, especially when he first got traded to Pittsburgh. So I like the fact that he was brave enough to say, I don't care about the bad stuff. I want to take the good stuff that I get from Phil Kessel.
Plus, hockey is still about getting one goal more than the other team. Yep. And if you're trying to accomplish that, then you want a guy like Phil Kessel, because, the one thing he does best is score goals. And, he's been a consistent goal scorer, even when things have not gone well, even when the coach didn't like him, no matter what was going on. Phil Kessel has found a way to score, at least enough goals to make him of value. So,
I remember, it was, from what I understand, it was Rick Tocchet when he was in Pittsburgh that was really the guy that took care of Kessel and kind of was the buffer between.
Correct.
The coach. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't think John Chayka didn't talk about Kessel to Tocchet? I'm sure he did. I'm sure, or maybe Tocchet even went to him and said, "Hey, Phil Kessel's available. I want him," because he knows his value and he knows that he can get along with him. The only problem with that is, and this, there's a big difference between the role of a head coach and an assistant coach. The assistant coach is supposed to be buddy with the players, and head coach is never a buddy with the player.
I played with Pierre LaRouche in New York, and he was at close to 50-goal scorer when he came here. I don't think there's any coach that was going to like Pierre LaRouche, because Pierre LaRouche was just Pierre LaRouche. His famous quote, I think he was in Montreal. His quote was, "They'd pay me $250,000 a year to score goals. If they want me to back check, they have to pay me another $250,000."
Yeah, hockey was a lot more fun when guys were that open. They were. Yeah. I wanted to just have some fun with this one, because you and I have talked about this before. I always am amused when I look in the scoring standings and I see a guy like Mark Scheifele, who I like a lot, a hard-nosed center who scores. I think he had 38 goals last year. I look and he's got 12 points in 10 games. So how can he be a minus player? Because he is a minus player. Here we are 10 games in, and, he's got a minus plus. His plus minus is I think he's -2 or something like that. And there are other guys like that. And I just always am amused that, you're playing on a team, you got more points than you've played games, and somehow you figure out a way to be a minus player. Is that a true reflection on how he's playing, or is that just that every minus is just an aberration?
I just think it's such a hard stat. Sometimes you can say, well, let's look at the rest of the team. If they're all minus and he's minus, it makes sense. But if everybody else is plus and he's minus, well, that's a bad sign. But you can also sometimes have a real team player who, instead of, when the other team's got a 2-on-1 going down the end of the ice, there are some players who will head to the bench right away to change, so they're not on for minus. Maybe he is the opposite. Maybe he's that team guy, and that's how I view him. He's that team guy that says, no, I'm going to stay on here and battle this out, ends up hurting him. Or is he on late in the game when it's 1-goal games and they pull the goaltender and the other team shoots it down and scores and he's on the ice all the time? Sometimes those hurt your plus minus too. So you'd really have to break it down and say, okay, where are his minuses coming from? Is he turning the puck over and making bad plays? Well, then he deserves a minus. But from what I see from that player, I think he's a character player. He's a leader. I'd like to say it's, he's sacrificing himself for the team, and it doesn't always work out in his way.
So when you heading to the bench, when there was a 2-on-1 and it looked like it might be a minus, was that an 1980s strategy, sort of like drinking beer and staying up all night, that modern players don't do?
I will tell you a story. When I was in the agent business, obviously I will not tell the player. The player had signed a contract that I'd signed him to, and he had a plus minus bonus that he did not achieve. And the father sat me down at the end of your meeting and tried to tell me that it was my fault he didn't get the plus minus bonus because I didn't tell him when he should get off the ice. And the family was there, and they jumped to my defense, and they looked at him like that. You can't do that, you know. So, no, I don't know if it's, again, I don't want to paint the picture that is widespread around the league, but I have seen it where players do that. You know, maybe it's a player that's struggling a little bit. He's a younger player or a player that has a bad plus minus. He said, listen, I need to get out of here and get off the ice. But it doesn't happen all the time, but it has happened.
I'm going to tell you a little story about how the game has changed since you were playing, though. I was at the NHL Media Tour in September in Chicago. I was talking to Jonathan Toews, and I was telling him that a player, and I didn't identify the player because he asked me not to say anything. He told me that in today's NHL, you can't eat a hamburger. You have to eat a hamburger alone, because if you do it at lunch, the guys are going to be all over you. And Toews actually said to me, he said, I can see that, because Toews is a guy that watches his food, his nutrition and everything. And you know, that is so foreign to what I'm sure you guys, the way you ate in the 1980s.
Well, that whole mentality, you know, I don't want to throw Wayne Gretzky under the bus. I don't think I'm hurting his career at all by saying the story. It was a preseason game, but I remember we had a preseason game. We'd gone out for a pregame skate, and Wayne was still hungry, so they went and got a cheeseburger and fries for him. He's eating that in the locker room, and he probably went out and scored 5 points that night too. So I mean, it was a whole different mentality. The mentality, we didn't know as much about diet and the hydration and training. I joke around with people now about some of the stuff that I know and that I do with, you know, I was even watching a documentary last night about eating plant-based food. And so I'm concentrating on doing that now. And I'm thinking to myself, like, who am I, right? Because when I played in the 80s, the plant barley and hops back then was what we were worried about, doing with plants.
Oh, it's that survivor mentality you've got now, having been on that show. Did you eat cockroaches and things out there? What, you know?
It was coconut and rice out there. We tried to eat some small little fish and crabs and everything like that. That didn't turn out too well. So,
well, we got to get out of here. But before you go, the last question I have for you: who's the team you like to watch most in the NHL right now?
I love watching. Well, obviously, I love the Rangers because I'm a Ranger fan. But I keep talking about it over and over. I love watching the Boston Bruins. They've got that methodical way of playing. They're led by great leaders. It seems like they come to play every night. They do all those little things right. They've got some dynamic. I love the way Pasternak plays, Charlie McAvoy, but Chara and Patrice Bergeron are still those great leaders that are still contributing so much to their team. So, short of the New York Rangers, the Boston Bruins are my team to watch. You know,
I still like watching the Penguins. Especially with it's how hard they work to try to still be the Penguins, even without Malkin. I kind of admire the way they do that. Alan, he's Laidlaw. We're Laidlaw and Allen. Thanks for joining us.